you from the ATL, from inside the paint and beyond the arc. This is Nothin But Nest, your Atlanta Hawks podcast. Now, here are your hosts, DeShaun Tate and Caleb Johnson.
Welcome into Nothin But Nest, episode 35. We come at a really interesting time, it feels like, once again, when it comes to talking about the Atlanta Hawks. Caleb Johnson here with my co-host, DeShaun Tate. DeShaun, how are you doing on this eve of another unfortunate Hawks loss?
I'm outstanding, Caleb. You know I got to see what your bracket looks like. And I know that we're not here for that.
Oh, no, it's fine. No. We can... I honestly, I'd rather have that conversation right now. You want to talk some college basketball? Yeah, I feel like I would much rather have that conversation right now than unfortunately talk about what we've seen from the last two games from the Atlanta Hawks. As we had a good streak going, a nice thing building as the Atlanta Hawks went to Washington, took down the Wizards, both of those games. It was like, all right. And then they came home against Boston, and I asked a fellow reporter, I said, how do you think, what are the vibes around this team? Because obviously I wasn't around them in Washington, and for that Boston game that everyone had essentially kind of built up as like, oh, this is just going to be impossible because Boston hadn't played since Wednesday. They had just had days off. The Celtics got to Atlanta on Friday night because as I was going in for, that would have been, Miami? No, I got that backwards. That was, who am I blanking on right now? It's been so many games. Say what? Oh, it was game two. It was game two of, no, it
Miami.
wasn't.
Went from back-to-back in Miami to back-to-back in Washington and then Boston, right?
Yeah. So Washington again. The second night of the back-to-back was Saturday against Boston, and I remember asking what the vibes were because, it felt like it was going to be an uphill battle against that Celtics team, and I was surprised to hear the vibes are really good. Like this team is a believer in being competitive against the Celtics. I had gone on and done a radio appearance earlier in the day on Saturday and was asked quite honestly, hey, how do you think this game turns out? And it was not in the Hawks' favor. Everything is literally against them. The fact that they're on a back-to-back, the fact that they're playing essentially the best offense in the NBA at that point. And then I was kind of surprised that the game was down to 7 points into the fourth quarter, at a point that it was the Hawks could potentially be, truly compete in this game. Maybe could even surprise some people and pull it out. They didn't. They did fall 134-125. But it felt like, all right, this team maybe turned a corner. And even when they were shorthanded Bogey Bogdanovic against the Celtics, it was like, you know what? This is new team, new coach, and so you don't have to worry about those same old things. And then Monday night happens, and they play the Minnesota Timberwolves, who essentially had about the same rest that they did. Played on, They played on Friday, didn't play on Saturday, and they lay an absolute egg against the Minnesota Timberwolves. Were completely outmatched from quite literally, DeShaun, the first play of the game. Trae Young comes up the floor. He gets stripped. And then you see Jaden McDaniels go the opposite direction. And that kind of started his pretty successful night that Jaden McDaniels, not known for a lot of minutes or a lot of scoring. And yet he was providing a lot of excitement early on for Minnesota, that Anthony Edwards, of course, then came behind and kind of filled in the gaps there. Then the Hawks lose on Monday, 136-115. It was over pretty early on in the second half. But just what do you take away from this? You get a couple of wins, you start building some momentum, and then you hit the stretch of losing to the Celtics and then losing embarrassingly to the Timberwolves.
Yeah, it's gonna. I feel like for the remainder of what's left is gonna give us that vibe of like, okay, what's the identity here? Like, whether you're
Are we
winning
still
games,
asking that question, DeShaun?
whether well, we know that the identity clearly looks like whatever it is, it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have those instances, like you said, against Boston, where the game gets kind of tight, early in the season when it was like, I know it was early, Milwaukee was on their winning streak and whatever else, or unbeaten, or just whatever the case was. And it was like, they look like they can beat some teams that they got no business beating. And then they
Mm-hmm.
get beat by teams that they should have no business getting beat by the amount of points they got any business getting beat by them. And so that does raise the red flags and eyebrows, and you have your reservations about who they are from an identity standpoint. I'm trying to remember, because it seems like they just can't get away for whatever reason. It feels like every time I look up, I'm looking at 500, 500, 500. Maybe I'll play those numbers when it's time to do Mega Millions or whatever. But it's like they can't get away from this 500 number. I don't know the last time I can recall that they were. I don't know if that number is 3 games above or 4 games above or whatever, but when is the last time that, we've said that they've been comfortably above 500 at any point this season? And because I don't know the answer to that.
I can tell you.
When was that?
5 games into the season when they were 4-1.
There you go. There goes my point. So that's the concern. Yeah. But because I think the more concerning part of that is because you can, if you're going to, it almost feels like if you're going to be bad. Not lose games on purpose, but if you're going to be bad, then just be bad. But because it's almost like teasing, it's like somebody hanging that little carrot over your head that's like, all right, you can do it. You're almost over 500. Nope, you're just under 500. Okay, here you go. Let's try it again. Oh, you got over 500 by 1 game. Let's see if you can make it 2 up. You did it by 2. Let's see if you can. No, not quite. It just and you're gonna stick and stay there at that 500 number. And that is the part that I think makes it just that much more frustrating, because you have the chance to be that good, but you just can't find a way to be that good.
So you're telling me the Hawks need to stop, playing with Breslin, need to stop, doing that baby mentality of
Speaking of babies, especially in this game on Monday night against Minnesota, the defense has been atrocious. They can't cover a baby with a blanket during nap time. Like it felt so bad, and I feel like that's just one of the struggles. Like, we've been talking about the Hawks dealing with these defensive struggles for how long? Like, before we even got to a point, this is beyond Nate McMillan. Like, from a consistency standpoint of not being able to string together consistent games of stops, which is ultimately what is needed and necessary to be able to, go on to the next level as a team. But this goes all the way back to Lloyd Pierce, when it was like, well, somebody's hanging 160 on the Hawks tonight, type of deal. It's like, that goes back to Lloyd Pierce days. And it's like, how much have you really grown from that standpoint? And are we still dealing with the 3-point, shooting woes and still struggling? I mean, listen, 18% on the night, still talking about turnovers for that matter. But I want to mention one thing while we're talking about the turnovers. How many turnovers did 11 have tonight?
He had 4.
Okay. So of the 18, I think with the game that he had, and he's been improving. I don't know how much you've been watching, Caleb.
Oh, I've been watching. I got something to say, but I'm gonna let you finish.
You've been front and center for this, so there has been some improvement. Maybe not from 3, but just in general, there has definitely been some improvement. I'm looking at this game on Monday night against Minnesota. Who are they gonna blame this time, Caleb?
They're not gonna blame 11. I can tell you that right now.
What?
I can tell you that right now.
You mean to tell me they're not blaming 11 for something anymore? Those days over, or we can't confidently say that just yet?
I'm saying when it comes to the Minnesota Timberwolves game on Monday night, March the 13th, there is no way you can blame Trae Young for the Hawks' performance.
I got to make sure we say that again because I don't know. Rick will clip everything else.
And do it.
So I just want to make sure we're on the same page. I just need Caleb to repeat that, just that little piece right there, because there's this thing called keep the same energy, right? And we heard 11 talk about that, multiple times. I think that the praise needs to be as loud as the criticism was. And I don't think that we're getting that. And I think that's very unfair.
Okay. That might be true for some people. I won't say that's true for me. I've been one guy. I've been someone who's said all season long, and I know we've got the clips of it, I'm going to give him his credit when he deserves his credit. I'm also going to give him his criticism when he deserves his criticism. I think the biggest issue that I've had with people who are massive supporters of Trae Young and Trae himself is I don't think he handles the moments well when it is his fault. When it is like he did something or he was a part of something that led to a loss. However, he has a pretty easy time handling situations where he wasn't at fault. And I'll say against the Timberwolves, Trae did come to the podium and people did not have questions for him. And that was rather frustrating that I was one of two people to ask Trae about this performance because I want to understand. And I don't know that I always sit around just having like a bunch of questions ready to go. But I asked Trae about the ball movement issues. And he spoke on actually something that Quinn Snyder also spoke on too that I'll play in just a bit of the way Minnesota plays defensively is they don't switch. They stay on their man. They are a strong defensive team who guards their man really well. So when you do pass the ball out, there is a hand there to potentially poke the ball away and force it into a turnover, or you pass it to a guy who doesn't have a good look and who takes a ill-advised shot and they don't fall. The Hawks don't know what to do when they get in those situations. What they do know how to do is to get to the end of the game and to say, this is what happened, and we didn't know what to do with it. Now, like I said, continuing the thought of this night can't be blamed on Trae Young. Yeah, finished with 41 points, 10 for 10 from the free throw line, 7 assists, and 6 rebounds. Like that, that's a pretty incredible. Oh, and a steal, because we're back. I think he didn't have a steal against the Celtics, which broke. He had gone 5 straight games with at least one steal. That streak ended against Boston, but he's right back against the Timberwolves with a steal.
This is the same guy. This is the same guy that don't play defense, right?
For a lot of the season, for a lot of this season and years in the past.
I just want to know if we're talking about the same player. That's the only thing I want to know.
Yes, we are. We're playing. Well, we're watching a player who, I'll say this: Quinn Snyder is getting through in some aspect because, and it might just be, game plan wise, where this is something I have talked with some people about, as it felt like the previous game plan defensively for the Hawks with Trae Young on the floor was put him on the weakest guy or really just get him out of the way. Like he can just Trae can go stand in the corner on the 3-point line and essentially be not very involved in the play. And now Trae is he's playing in space and getting those opportunities to poke the ball away. We're also seeing him take more contact, which I don't know if it's because it's the part of the season where things are starting to matter more, and so because maybe those early points in the season, he wasn't as willing to take some of the contact that he's getting, and that has just changed now. I don't necessarily know what it is.
Mhm.
I do figure we should give some credit to Quinn Snyder, but I don't think that Quinn can just come in and, like that, get a strong defensive performance out of Trey. I will say there's another element to this that is not positive in Trey's favor, that it's just an effort thing, that he wasn't putting in the effort before, now he is putting in the effort. I don't know that it can be just chopped up to that alone. I think that plays a part of it. It's just he's doing his part. He's definitely doing his part, more than his part, especially offensively, because I talked about Trey had 41 points. The next guy in line was Onyeka Okongwu, who had 16.
Yeah.
Guys were not helping Trey out. Now, did Trey shoot particularly well from three? No, he was 1 of 4. This team as a whole, 4 for 22. You talked about the 18%. This is the fewest made threes the Hawks have shot all season. And I think it's those, like their 4 fewest 3-point games, maybe they're 5 of their fewest 3-point games. They've lost all of those because obviously in this league, if you're not knocking down threes, you're just not scoring. Because the other element of this, not only were they not shooting threes or not hitting threes, they also weren't scoring as well in the paint. They were dominated in the paint. Minnesota scored 82 of their
82
100
to 66.
Yeah, 82
points
in the paint.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say, Caleb. If you have to find some sort of optimism here somewhere, they out-rebound Minnesota. And when you start looking at what they did, from an offensive rebounding standpoint, which is always, I think probably maybe the most underrated stat for a team out there is offensive rebounding.
Mm-hmm.
They out-rebounded them on the offensive side, 18-5. And obviously, we know the paint points, look bad. Here's my question to you, Caleb, because we can go in circles and we can talk about 11 and who didn't help and who did this and who didn't do that. Are we at this point, and this is just kind of my message to Hawks, nation, my Hawks fan, diehard Hawks fans. And let me sit up straight when I say this, Caleb, because I want to look directly into the camera and I just need some overstanding. Are we as Hawks fans and as Hawks nation willing now and essentially considering just accepting the fact that this season is a wash? Because I feel like that is basically what all of this is coming down to. And the excuses have already been made, that they're, the new coach and came in at this time of the year. And no matter what happens from this point forward, I feel like that's the vibe that I get amongst the consensus. That is just like, we don't really realize, think that we have a realistic chance at either A, preventing ourselves from being in a play-in situation, B, winning that playoff situation to become a legit playoff, not even contender, but just performer, if you will, participator. But is that kind of where we are? Like, is everybody just kind of looking at their imaginary clocks and just counting down the game, saying, I can't wait until all of this is over, because then we get a chance to look forward to next season and see what it was really all about and all the time that they had with the new coach and all these other things. Is that what Caleb Johnson feels? Because what we don't do here on this program is we don't just speak for the people, per se. We let the people speak for themselves. Feel free to tweet at us. But I need to know from Caleb, like, are you just basically at this point, like, I'm at 0%. Like, I have zero expectation. I'm accepting it as a wash. And it's really right now mentally just about looking forward to next year.
I think that's where the players are at. I
Yeah,
genuinely believe that is where the players are at. I believe that's where the coaching staff is at. I believe
sure.
that's where the front office is at. I don't think that's where the owner is at. I don't think Tony Ressler is on a just kick the can down to next season.
Yeah,
However, I think everyone else on down to the media covering this team. Because, like I said, Trey was asked 2 questions after Minnesota. I was one of them. And no one really wanted to talk to
yeah,
anybody. Like
yeah,
media didn't want to talk to coaching the players, and coaching the players didn't really want to talk to us. Because I think it's one of those situations where, and even though I learned something from Quinn Snyder, and like I said, I'll play the audio just a bit. For this conversation, yeah, I think everyone who is a part of this team is realistic about where they're at, and has been for some time. I think there's part of
mm,
this fan base that was of the belief that had this idea going of like, hey, 2021, they made a coaching change, they went on a run, it was all exciting,
yeah, yeah,
and there's some like idea of, hey, maybe they can repeat that. Maybe we can have that excitement once again. Because I can tell you, DeShaun, I mean, that was one of the most fun times to be around the Atlanta Hawks, and that was one of the early moments for me covering this team. That it was like, wow, all right, this is what it could be like. And
sure.
I think because fans have gotten that taste, that it's like, all right, let's do it again. Let's do it.
Yeah,
We can do it again. And yet we we have to start doing some reality checks of, and I think there's a bit of a reality check that can go further than just this season. Um, but for this season alone, it's like the 8th seed is where this team should be.
yeah,
The expectations of maybe winning a play-in game, maybe making a playoff series,
maybe not. Yeah,
maybe not. That should be where things are, because what the front office invested in this coaching staff and making the change when they decided to make it, in making the moves at the trade deadline that they decided to make, were all for, yeah, it'll help out a little bit this season, but the focus is on the future. And I think we, as people who cover this team, and I know this is part of me working on 929 The Game, a radio station that is the flagship for the Atlanta Hawks. I think we want to delay this idea, or negate this idea that they're kicking the can down to next season, but it's where they're at. And I do think there is something to watching the remainder of these 13 games. And yes, there are 13 games left because I've been counting down.
yeah.
There is something
Shocker.
to, yeah, there is something to look out for, but having realistic expectations of what the end of the season is going to look like, should not have changed at all in the last few weeks, specifically since Quinn Snyder came, because Quinn Snyder, since he showed up, is 3-5 in
Yeah,
8 games. In the last 5 games, the Atlanta Hawks have given up at least 130 points, and they've lost all 3 of those games that they've given up at least 130 points. Now, why do I say all that? Is because while I do believe Quinn Snyder is the most likely candidate of all the candidates that can turn this team around,
hmm,
other things have to change too. And that's outside, and that's why I put the conversation of Trae Young to the side. Yes, he's got some growing to do. Yes, he has got to work better with teammates, because there is an element of this thing of like you had 41 points and you're telling me none of your teammates could really make another impact.
Yeah.
However, separate that, and I'm not going on any further of blaming Trey because there have got to be other guys stepping up.
There does?
Absolutely.
You
And
sure?
it's not just, but it's DeShaun, it's not just a coach. Like I feel like people were so expecting Quinn Snyder to come in and just completely
Change
change
the
this thing.
world.
Yeah, and just
Yeah.
in the blink of an eye, it was just the coach. And
Yeah.
he just needed to come in and put in a new system. And they've played 8 games, so you're not going to convince me that his system isn't for the most part implemented. That if it was just the coach, we would see a better record than 3-5 in 8 games with Quinn Snyder. It's obviously more than that. It's obviously partly to do with the roster. It's partly to do with, hey, look, I'll say it, DeJounte Murray has been a disappointment.
Yeah.
I'm
And he
sorry.
hasn't and he hasn't been the only one. When you
No,
start
you're
factoring
right.
in some of the things that, and again, I don't want to just pinpoint one person here or there.
That's totally fair.
But I think it's fair to say that John is also in that conversation for sure, without question.
But we've
Talking
kind of
about John,
but we've grown. That's
but it's
I
like,
don't know.
what we've done is we have accepted certain things that I don't think is appropriate. Like, I do understand that the
You
times and instances where he doesn't get the ball in the moments or in the spaces of which will help him, and help this team maximize everything that you can get out of him. Sitting here looking at it, 9 points and 3 rebounds this entire month, only getting single digits in scoring in 4 of the 7 games that have been played this month also. And no double digits on the rebounding battle, by the way, in all of those. So, and not only is it very unfortunate for the Hawks, but even other decisions that they have made. Some of them not even a decision. How much, when you know that you have this lack of talent on the bench in depth amongst all these other things, and you're not getting what you need to get out of the key contributors off of that bench, that's a problem. When you're, trying to position Jalen Johnson for certain things, and he's not able to perform and give that to you on a consistent basis, which I understand because he hasn't been in the league very long, but the role changes for him, and that's each day, that's each game.
Sure.
And even more so where I think that this team is in a really weird space just because there's still conversations being had about all these different Bogey and 18 million or whatever, and then or DeAndre and some of these different guys. The focus just clearly is not there. You're turning the ball over. I would rather, and I was taught this at a very young age, I would rather take a bad shot than to turn the ball over. At least you got a chance for a rebound or whatever. Giving the ball to the opponent is just something that it's the bonehead errors. It's not even about the man, whatever. You just can't stop these guys. Like, there never should have been an instance besides, Anthony Edwards tonight where you can say that there was someone else that you had to worry about. I mean, even look about it on the bench, right? What kind of effect did not having AJ Griffin for the amount of time with him seeing limited time? What kind of effect did that play on what this team needs to do and is efforting to do? And I mentioned sometimes you have Jalen Johnson out there, and he looks lost. Like you don't let Luka Garza. What are we looking at? Luka, 14 points and whatever. Luka Garza now. Luka Garza, a guy who can't even jump over the cell phone that we're talking on. If your last name is Jokic, then fine. We're having a different conversation in terms of being athletically gifted. But you just have to get more out of those guys. And I mean, the limitations that are put on Rudy Gobert offensively, which is very much what we probably see more times than not out of someone like a Clint Capella, who's still going to consistently and persistently be that workhorse. But this team is just not good. I know I'm not educating anyone on when I say that. That's not anything new. But the direction of where it's going, not being on the upward trajectory and guys just not appearing to be coming to play, I think is even a bigger concern.
But I guess my issue with that, DeShaun, is that was against Minnesota.
Yeah.
You go look back against how they played against Washington, or you look ahead to see how, they could potentially play. I mean, I'm expecting them at this point to be in a shootout with Golden State coming up. Like it's one of those, the fact of your favorite thing to talk about, the fact that they are consistently inconsistent, shows up. So and it drives people insane because it's like, I don't know what to expect, because you show up to the arena one night and you get really strong performances. You get team performances where, Trey's got maybe 27 and DeJounte's got 23, and, you got a strong performance from the bench and you win. And then you come into a game against like Boston where things should not be competitive. You should be getting blown out like you did against Minnesota by Boston on Saturday. Yet you stay competitive in that game, and you even deal with a situation that we didn't even spend any time on, because honestly, it's so far in the past at this point. But you deal with a scuffle of Trae Young and Marcus Smart, where Marcus Smart throws Trae to the ground because, as we've now learned, Marcus thought that Trae, in an attempt to lay the ball up, kicked him in the junk. Yeah. Thought there was something intentional there, because a guy going to the basket is definitely thinking about you behind him with his foot. There's too many people thinking just things are happening in an intentional way when they're not. But that leads to a big situation that the Hawks actually dealt with pretty well following that moment, where, like I said, they had that game into a single-digit game where it was competitive. And then you come out against a team like Minnesota, where you talk about Rudy Gobert not being a big offensive piece for this team, but he's obviously going to be strong defensively. You've got Anthony Edwards, who for a long stretch of this game could not hit a three. He was 0 for 8 and then finished 2 for 10. So it's one of those, like, you weren't even getting big production out of Edwards. Like it was in range of, you could still be competitive and get the points that you were getting from him. But you mentioned Luka Garza, a guy who I think averages like 6 minutes or 9 minutes a game, gets double that. Yeah, I think he averages 9 minutes a game, and I think he averages 6 points a game. And in this one, he goes for double the minutes and double the points. So he plays 18 minutes, gets 14 points. Like, what are we doing here? Because and then you start looking into things. And DeShaun, I don't know if you've noticed this trend that's been happening under Quinn Snyder. Onyeka Okongwu, 24 minutes. Clint Capella, 21.
Yeah, weird. Very weird.
It's almost like what we saw to start the season, where you remember when we were having conversations about, like, I'll say, because I was the one bringing it up, of going, when's Onyeka Okongwu getting swapped into the starting lineup for Clint Capella? And then Clint went on, and he was like the Hawks' best player for the month of November and into December, and then he gets hurt. Like, And now we're back into the situation where it feels like the Hawks don't have a legitimate big man who can deal with these guys in the paint. You're getting dominated completely in the paint. 82 points the Timberwolves score. And then we get to an explanation of, because this is what I wanted to play, Quinn Snyder talking about why there wasn't more ball movement, and why the Hawks weren't able to shoot well from three, while they weren't able to shoot well just in general, and you ended up with a game like you did. I don't know if everyone will necessarily take the excuse, because it is an excuse, but Quinn at least tried to break things down into what Minnesota was doing and why it was so effective.
You won't have, I've been through this 100 times, because you're not going to have a high assist game when they literally aren't leaving anybody. Like you're going to throw the ball to the corner, they're not open. So it becomes, a 2-on-2 pick and roll game. And there's a reason O had 8 offensive rebounds. There's a reason Trey in the lane, and DJ eventually too. You get cracks on them offensively, and you shoot off the dribble threes. And we started taking those. Guards have to keep their dribble alive. You can't just pull in one dribble and settle. But if you keep your dribble alive, you can eventually get on the rim. Or eventually they'll pull in, and then you may have a kick to the corner. You have to, I don't know what we were from 3, but you have to make a shot to get an assist too. So that has something to do with it. If you're 1 for 13, I think we were at halftime, hopefully we can get 4 more assists. But it's a good question. I get it, but that's the way you have to attack a team that's playing in pick and roll like that.
All right, so Quinn Snyder essentially putting it out there that, as we talked about earlier, the fact that Minnesota is a team that they defend their man very well, so much so that it doesn't allow for opportunity for the Hawks to get assists, because when they swing that ball over, their guy is guarded and he's having to take a contested shot. Are you buying this, DeShaun? Is this just Minnesota is a 7th seed in the Western Conference, so is it just they're a strong fortress that you just can't break through with their defense?
I don't know. I don't know if it's necessarily so much that. I know that, one of the more popular phrases that gets thrown around sometimes is styles make fights, and you got to prepare differently. Guys got different guys on their rosters of, you have to anticipate that guys are going to close you out on shots. Mm-hmm. It goes back to what we were initially talking about at the very beginning when you were talking about the ball movement, the spacing of the floor, and not, things being kind of stagnant, things of that nature. Obviously something that you have to fix, but I think that it's certainly something that's fixable. If that's what Coach Quinn is believing, that, some of the things they need to tighten up, that's what he's there for. Like, he doesn't show up and then everything falls into place the way that it did when they made their run to the Eastern Conference Final. Like, this is something that is still going to take time. Everybody's not excited because necessarily things are going to completely do, a 180, like maybe I predicted, but more so because of the fact that it's a hire to get things back in place at a certain point. It's more excited about the hire so that things can become what they once were, not so much about the hire so that things can automatically pick back up where it left off, when things were going so well. So I'm actually okay with it. They just have to obviously do better at that spacing piece and knowing that guys are going to close out. And you got to be able to swing that ball around and have that ball. It's got to be fluid. One little hesitation on a jump shot where somebody's wide open and then didn't take it and you hesitate. Now you're looking for who to swing it to. The defense has already recovered. It's something that it's going to have to take time. It's a new system and there's a new way of doing things, but that just doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. Well, it's going to begin on Friday. So the Hawks actually getting a little bit of time to regroup.
Yeah.
I do remember last time, DeShaun, that the Hawks went from when Quinn showed up on a Tuesday, and then they didn't play again until that Friday. It went pretty well that time around, because of course Quinn gets some time for practice. You get to coach. You get to actually install some things, and then theoretically you could see a different product out on the floor, instead of a team getting beat by, they're down by as many as 28 to Minnesota, and we're just never really competitive at all in that second half. Maybe you'll see something different this time around as they get days off before they play the Warriors on Friday. Who are, interestingly enough, they had kind of been on a losing streak there for a bit. I think they had lost, I know the Lakers were one that stuck out. Then they lose to Memphis without Ja. They beat Milwaukee in overtime, and then they beat Phoenix. So interesting thing, that things are coming up where the Hawks will actually be the team who's had more rest.
Yeah, to get the rest, yeah.
Yeah, by the time that they face the Warriors on Friday, and it'll be the Warriors who will have played on Wednesday, and then we'll come home, or we'll face the Hawks, who will be at home, to hopefully get things going back in a different way. Then you have at San Antonio, you get DeJounte Murray getting to go play his former team, but in their house, where he used to be at. Obviously, third worst team in the NBA. That should hopefully help things out. And then follow that up with you get a Tuesday home game against Detroit, who is, of course, tied for the worst record in the NBA. So it feels like, as much as we've kind of been some Debbie Downers for this episode and saying this season doesn't matter, obviously, at this point.
Well, I didn't say that. I just proposed the question, Caleb.
I said it.
Oh, okay.
I said it. Sorry. Caleb Johnson was the one to say that this current season does not matter anymore, that it is clearly just for coach getting comfortable with his players, development of those players, and then vetting the roster and evaluating the talent.
Well, you know what's even worse than Caleb Johnson with all the negativity and the pessimistic views, right?
What's that?
That's DeShaun Tate saying that this team's going to turn things around and find a way to get on a win streak beyond 2 games and get well beyond 5, or get just beyond 500, just one game or 2 games above 500. But there's still a little bit of time. I think that the main thing is I would imagine the consensus would agree with me when I say this. Now is the time that you need to be playing the games like you're on the outside completely looking in. Instead of seeing this that you're an 8 seed, you need to be looking at this like you are in 11. Like you have absolutely no chance. And you need to be playing like your hair is on fire. I know that that's easier said than done, but as far as the mentality, that's exactly what it needs to be, because you cannot afford to just drop a couple here, there, and then try and hurry up and play catch up. So it'll just be nice to see them string along, some games, starting with the defending world champions. I think that's what other better place to start, than there. And just to be able to change the mindset, the mentality a little bit, while still knowing that there are people like Caleb Johnson who are counting you out, and not saying that you don't have a chance at playoffs or whatever, but you just really have to have that type of mentality. And there is that very fine line that you have to draw in the sand between having that chip on your shoulder that everybody's counting us out, and on the flip side of that coin, feeling like we're out to prove everybody wrong, like just sticking to your game and what you do, what but also putting some emphasis and some urgency under it, with knowing that you're not in a very comfortable spot at all. So it is a fine balance that you do have to find. Happy medium.
There we go. The other element of this, the Hawks have not lost 3 games in a row since they lost to the Lakers at home on December the 30th. That was a part of a 4-game losing streak that I think they had. So that would be another element. You've seen this team, especially as of late, lose 2, win a couple, at least win 1, lose 2. But they haven't lost 3 in a few months now, and that was obviously under a different regime too. So you don't want to start that trend as you're trying to stay afloat and stay competitive in the Eastern Conference, as the Atlanta Hawks right now are a game and a half ahead of the 9th seed, the Toronto Raptors. They are 2.5 games behind the Miami Heat in the 7th seed. So it's a good time to close that gap with the 7th seed, create a little space with the 9, and stay competitive, stay interesting, stay exciting for us to talk. We want exciting Hawks basketball to talk about. Whether they win or lose, quite honestly, it's these kinds of games that we've experienced as of late that make it more difficult. And so that's all I ask is, against the Warriors, be competitive and entertaining and exciting, and then we'll look for some positives. Then we can look for the positives and not be so much on the Debbie Downer, on the Eeyore, on the just really negative about this team. But with that, we'll talk to you guys later this week. For my co-host DeShaun Tate, I'm Caleb Johnson. Thanks to you for watching and listening to Nothing But Nest.